Okay, so the first presentation here, I'm going to upload it to a Dropbox onto a Dropbox folder, and I'm going to email the link to the Dropbox folder so you can download the file. And also the next presentations, I'm going to put the next presentation files onto the same Dropbox link. So you just need to look at that link. Yeah. Okay. So the first presentation is basically about understanding the key terms, understanding the theory, a bit of theories on the international trade, which is basically a foundation for us to look into international business strategy. Okay, and next week on next Friday, we are going to discuss the environmental scanning that helps us to understand, a bit of reasons why people do international globalization, basically. Okay, why globalization happens next week. Okay, and after that, we are going to discuss the environmental scanning in the context of developing international business strategy. Okay, so let's have a look at this presentation tonight, which is basically about the a few key terms on international trading that we need to understand. And I believe you may have heard some of the terms that we are going to use tonight. Okay, so yes, key terms and also some theories of the international trades, and we are going to leave the second and third objectives in the next presentations. Okay. All right, so this is what we mean by international business, which is basically about a firm that engages in international or cross-border economic activities. That's what we mean by the term international business. So when it comes to international business strategies, basically we are looking at firms engaging in the cross-border economic activities. Okay, and multinational enterprise is actually about a firm engaging in the foreign direct investments, and the FDI, or foreign direct investment itself, is actually about investment in controlling and managing the value-added activities in other countries. Okay, now the FDI he plays a critical role for some countries, some countries, because they expect a massive inflow of FDI to help them with the to support their economic activities locally. Okay. Okay, so, well, let's have a look at briefly about the term international marketing. It refers to marketing activities actually undertaken when a company becomes significantly involved in local marketing environments in the other markets. Okay, so we are in one of our sessions, we are going to discuss the evolution of a global company, starting from domestic operation until we set up a global operation. Okay. And export, which is basically one of the international business activities, quite common. It represents marketing activities that are involved when a firm sells its products across the border, basically. Okay, so outside the domestic base of the operation, and export activities basically are quite common, especially in today's business landscape, where we promote trading among countries. We create some some cooperations or alliances, okay, in the region. So we allow goods and services to flow in. Okay? All right, so a bit more terms. The domestic marketing itself is basically aimed at the home market. So we actually do marketing activities in the single market, or this is what we call as the home market, where the other ones are basically we export to certain markets that becomes the host market. Okay. And export marketing itself, we sell outside domestic-based operation when the products are physically shipped from one market to the market. And again, international marketing goes beyond the export activities, where it has much more activities in the local market environment. So we may have the our own sales subsidiaries to help us developing the entire business and activities in that host market. Yeah. So just a bit of terms in here. And in our studies, we will also be looking at the balance of payments. We may have heard that term before, which is basically about the accounting record of the transactions between residents of one country and residents of the rest of the world over a given period of time. Okay? It is an accounting term, actually. So we have what calls the outflows of funds and inflows of funds. Payments abroad, the outflows basically is about the payments abroad that must be made as a result of purchase. Okay? So if we make purchase from any merchants from overseas, then there will be outflow of funds. Okay? Inflow is the opposite of it. So we receive payments if we do trading activities, and we receive payment from the overseas. That means we are bringing funds in to the market. Okay? Right, now these are a few key economic indicators that we also need to look at when it comes to analyzing the market situation from an economic perspective, like GDP, GNP, income per capita, unemployment rate, okay, consumer confidence, and so on and so forth. Okay, that's part of the measures when it comes to analyzing whether certain markets are worth for us or interesting for us to penetrate. And the concept of GDP itself, those who like, just briefly about the GDP, those who like mathematical symbols, it reflects the all consumptions plus the investment and also government spending, and the difference between the exports and imports activities. So that actually reflects the GDP. In other words, it is a term that is used to estimate the value of total worth of the country's production and services, okay? Which is calculated over the course of 1 year. Now, GNP is another term, which is basically the GDP plus the total gains from overseas investments minus the income earned by the foreign national domestically. So in our country, we may have multinational companies operate in our market. Okay, when they gain something from their operations in our domestic market, they may, we assume they take the profits back to their home market. Therefore, we remove that the income. Right? So, so a bit of differences in terms of GDP and GNP. GDP reflects the increase. If you look at the increase in exports, it will lead to the increase in GDP, but it may not increase in GNP because the GDP, because if the export activity is made by foreign national companies or a multinational company in our market, then it will be discounted from GNP calculation. Okay. All right. So income per capita, easy to understand, I guess. Total personal income of the population divided by the total population, we get the income per capita basically to reflect the wealth of the country, to help us understanding the purchase power of the country. Okay. Okay. So a bit of stats that I got some time ago in terms of the global retail sales value. That if you look at that, that shows an increasing trend worldwide from 2015 to 2020. It is the estimate to 2020 actually to look into the retail sales value. Keep growing. So it is quite phenomenal actually in terms of the global retail sales value. So you can see that you can have feeling that it is actually quite interesting for one company after they are successful in one market, in their home market. They they will think about participating in the global in the global retail sales, okay, activities. And e-commerce, another area that is interesting. If you look at that, it is a growing trend, and the growth is actually quite dramatic over the since 2015. If you look at 2015, 2020, that is another tool for a business player to participate in the global business activity. Okay, so that is another outlook, another insights in terms of participating in the international trades. Okay, right. So a bit more information about the global economy. So if you look at that, it is the Euromonitor International also records some increase in terms of the GDP globally. We expect by 2020 it will be 3.5, whilst if you look at that, the emerging markets will contribute more, and the advanced economies will have a slight decrease, basically. So we expect some emerging markets to participate more in driving the global economy. Okay. Since 10 years ago, people talk about the 4 markets like Brazil, Russia, India, and China to drive the emerging markets growth rate, basically, in terms of the participation in the global economy. And we know that the China and India have become quite prominent when it comes to international trading activities. Okay, and we also know that China now, if you look at the size of the GDP, it has placed itself nicely in the second position after the U.S. market, if you refer to the GDP, gross domestic product. Okay, so that's a bit of outlook, guys, and also stats, and so a few key terms in terms of the international trades. Now let's have a look at the second items that which is basically about the theories of international trades. Okay, and after that, we are going to, I believe we may still have a bit of time to discuss, especially the assessments. So yeah, that's the area that we can also have a look. Okay, after last night's discussion. Okay. Okay. Now there are 2 types of theories of international trade. We call them as the classical theory and the modern theory. Okay, the mercantilism is part of the classical theory, where it views international trade as a zero-sum game. So it's more about the competition in the market, basically, and they use wealth. They also view the wealth of the world is fixed and it is measured in gold and silver. Okay, and you may recall that people talk about the gold rush, for instance, in America, gold rush in Australia, for instance, because it is one of the key measures that people use to determine the wealth of a nation. A nation that, and based on this theory, okay, a nation that export more and import less, okay, would enjoy net inflow, okay, of these gold and silver. Therefore, they will become richer than the others. Okay, so it's pretty much, you know, common sense, I guess. When I earn more rather than I spend, then I will become richer, basically. So that's the logic behind this theory. Okay. This theory, although we label it as part of the classical theory, but it is not extinct at all, actually, and very much alive. And it may also lead to the protectionism, because we are aware, based on this theory, people are aware that, well, if we buy more from overseas, that means we are going to spend more, right? Then if you look at the BOP, balance of payments, then we are going to have outflow. More outflow than inflow of the of the values. Okay, and at the extreme case, we also find that based on this theory, international trade may also lead to the protectionism. Okay, you guys may remember that the U.S. and China, are having trade wars recently. Okay, so where the U.S. will charge, will charge a few $100 billion. Actually, that will impact a few $100 billion US, and they have increased that again. And the Chinese government has also done the same thing, kind of retaliation, basically. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing. If you do the same thing, if you do that, I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, so that will increase the protectionism between the two countries. Okay, although you may recall that in the spirit of WTO, World Trade Organization, we want to reduce the trade barriers between among all countries in the world. Okay, so that is actually the it is interesting from the international trade perspective to look at the trade war between these two countries, and also more importantly is, I guess, the impact that people are still estimating there. People are still debating in terms of, okay, what will happen to me? What will happen to my country? Well, will they need to if you look at Jack Ma, for instance, he gave a speech some time ago, just last week actually. China needs to find different trading partners in the world because it may be getting harder to do trades with the U.S. And it's not only because of Donald Trump driving it, but after Donald Trump periods, it may still sustain the trend of protectionism may still sustain. Okay, well, what do you think, guys, about that in terms of the U.S.-China trade war? Well, it is, the issue came first when Donald Trump pointed out, hey, we have imbalanced trading situation between with China, so I'm going to charge, higher taxes, and therefore that will and the Chinese government also does the same thing. Would you think that this issue will sustain after Donald Trump period, or would you think that now it will be over? What's your gut feel?
If I can step in, I don't see that international trade is a zero-sum game at all. I see that everybody benefits from international trade. I do, however, believe that China has not been a good neighbour, and I think that it probably will persist. I think there's an appetite in the US to teach China a lesson.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Look, it's interesting to look at how it will end actually in terms of where it will lead actually. Probably Jack Ma is a bit too pessimistic about it, but let's see. I think Trump is raising a concern that there should be a balance between the U.S. and China, but at the same time, we also know that the U.S. was part of the the government. The U.S. government was one of the sponsors for free trading terms in the world, basically. So part of the promoting the global trades, basically. Yeah. Any thoughts from you, Davis? What do you think, Davis? Is that
I think it might happen even after Trump, because America still want to dominate the market, but I think China positioning itself in a new market like Africa, where it's growing so much. So at least the option I think they should have is to look for other options, look for new markets apart from America, because this issue might continue even with a different person, different president.
I think Sorry, I think India will start to challenge China. I think China not looked after their demographics very well, and I think India is on the rise, and I think it'll keep going.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting as well in terms of looking at India. They also develop, certain skills in quote unquote in the international trade competition, basically. Yeah, look, I agree with you that we shouldn't view that as a zero-sum game, but unfortunately, that's it is. This theory is still very much alive, unfortunately. But anyway, let's have a look at the second theory. Okay. The second theory actually suggests that countries should specialize in producing, this is what we call as the absolute advantage. And based on this theory, countries should specialize in producing what they are best at. Okay, it is basically the things that they have an absolute advantage. Okay, so if we use an illustration, for instance, we have Vietnam that can produce machinery as much as 400, let's say, as many as 400, and tomatoes 1,600 tons. Okay, whilst the Germany can produce 500 machinery and 500 tons tomatoes. From the absolute advantage theory perspective, Vietnam has the absolute advantage over Germany based on in producing tomatoes. So Vietnam should focus on tomatoes and import machinery from Vietnam. That's how the international trade will happen based on the absolute advantage. Okay. Now the thing is, when it comes to analyzing the trades between two countries, okay, probably we are not going to have this kind of case where one country is better on one aspect, okay, to the other countries, right? Therefore, actually, people also suggest the comparative advantage. Okay, so they look at the comparative advantage, where it looks into the measures of product cost of production, not in monetary terms, but in terms of foregone opportunity to produce something else. Okay, because this theory also suggests that the countries that do not have to have the absolute advantage to do to participate in the trading activities with the other countries. Okay. And please also bear in mind that they look into the opportunity cost of production. So look at the how much cost that they spend to produce certain products. Okay? So as an illustration, let's say if we go back to these two markets, Vietnam and Germany. Well, I do not use the term. I do not use China and the US as an examples because it may be a bit too sensitive in today's term, but let's look at these two markets. We have, again, let's say machinery and tomatoes. If you look at that, Vietnam produced 200 and 800 tons of tomatoes, whilst Germany produced 500 machinery and 1,000 tons of tomatoes. If you look at the opportunity costs of production, in Vietnam we have 1 ton of tomatoes costs 0.25 machines, whilst in Germany we have 1 ton of tomatoes costs 0.5 machines. Okay, so if we refer to the absolute advantage, Vietnam has nothing to offer. Okay, and Germany has both products to offer to Vietnam. Okay, but from the comparative advantage perspective, we look at that, Vietnam is more efficient in terms of producing tomato, whilst Germany has more skills in terms of producing machinery. So they can trade these two, okay, because of the relative cost of that they spend to produce each item, each product. Okay. Right, so that's the second theory, the comparative, the third theory after the absolute advantage. Okay, and the first three theories are labeled as the classical theories, where it was produced ages ago. Now the next ones are basically the modern theory, where we look at the product life cycle theory, for instance. Okay. based on the product lifecycle theory, they split the world into 3 categories. Lead innovation, which is basically the US. Okay, so pretty much US orientated type of, if you like. So they view the US is basically the source of the innovation. Okay, so they start with innovation, they spread that, and then the other developed nations, including Europe, will also follow suit. Will also follow that. And after that, it comes to the developing nations. Okay. Now, this theory attracts the criticism, as you can also appreciate that. Not really that everything will, will be led by the U.S. market, where they develop the new product in the U.S. and they spread these new products to the world. Basically, not always the case. It is not always the case. And the second criticism also suggests that stage-by-stage migration of production, okay, taking at least several years, if not decades. That is the assumption. In reality, however, an increasing number of firms now simultaneously launch new products around the globe. Okay, so they actually, when people develop new product, it may spread quickly around the globe, not trickle down like that. Okay, so if this theory suggests it will trickle down from the US and the other developed nations, and then until the developing nations, well, they say not that much. When you launch the product in today's business landscape, especially we have the digital technology, you launch it in your home market, you can launch it next to the other markets as well in the globe. Okay. Right. So yes, pretty much. A lot of it attracts a lot of criticisms because of that theory, and we know that some other parts of the world also produce their own capacity to bring innovation in the market. Okay, and interestingly, in one of our one of our sessions, I'm going to show you General Electric approach in terms of developing innovation, where they do not look at the US as the center of the innovation, but they also look at the other parts of the globe, and they try to find the balance between these two to generate the to get the leadership in terms of innovation. Right. Now, if we look at the theories of international trade, aside from the mercantilism theory, okay, the other theories are not basically have removed the role of the governments, all right? But the strategic trade also includes the role of the governments, okay? Well, the reason why the other theories have removed the role of the government is because, after Adam Smith suggests that, well, look, we need to reduce the role of the government because this is not we need to let the market works by itself. This is what he called as the capitalism system. Okay. Now, based on the strategic trade theory, it is actually inviting the intervention by the government in certain industries to enhance their odds for international success. Okay. Now, in this theory, they also introduced the term. They also acknowledge that there's at a certain point of time we may have industries that the government can assist us through the taxpayers' money, funding that, so that we can participate in that industry. Okay, so this is what we call as the high capital intensity and high entry barriers. Because of that, the private sectors cannot compete in that market. They cannot fund it. Therefore, we ask the government to help us to extend helps in there. Okay. Now, the other concept that we also need to include to understand in terms of the strategic trade is the first mover advantage, where it has the benefits of being the first that enters the market. So if we get someone entering the market in business, not only in terms of international trade, that firm, that business, that company has the benefit of enjoying the partnership or the leadership in that market. Okay, so in this instance, for instance, Boeing is the first mover, enjoy the first mover advantage. Okay, and that triggers the European government to assist domestic firms to launch Airbus. Guys, they extend their helps because of the high capital intensity in airline industry and also the high entry barriers in that industry. Okay, now from strategic trade perspective, you may recall that in Australian market, for instance, Toyota just December last year, 2017. Toyota just, shut their manufacturing facility in Australia, and you may recall that there was a debate in the Australian market. Well, this is where the government needs to extend their help because this industry contains high capital intensity and also has high barriers to entry. And yeah, there was a debate in that at that time, and we know that the Liberal government actually say, well, hang on a second, we need to. If the industry wants to survive, it has to be able to compete itself. Okay, then yeah, right. So that's basically the strategic trade theory. And now the last theory that I'd like to discuss with you is the competitive advantage or national competitive advantage. And you may have heard this name before, Michael Porter. He suggests that the competitive advantage has limitation because they focus on land, labor, natural resources as a capital. This is what we call as the factor endowments. But we also need to look at the nature of domestic demand when it comes to analyzing why a certain country can export one product and import the other product. We also need to look at the nature of domestic demand, the presence of appropriate suppliers, the nature of rivalry in the domestic demand. Because these four variables, the factor of endowments, the labor, land, and technology, or the traditional factors of production, the domestic demand, the suppliers, okay, and also the rivalry of the industry actually help that country to build their skills and capabilities to supply that product to the market. Okay, so for instance, one reasons why China may be able to offer cheaper price is basically their market is quite competitive, right? So when they export the product to the world, they actually have become the prices have become more competitive. Of course, we can also argue there are some other reasons in there as well. Okay, right. So that's the competitive advantage. Guys, and this is basically a list of key concepts that we discussed tonight. Okay, we have we discussed briefly about the key terms. We discussed about the theories of international trade. Okay, there are 6 of them that we discussed briefly tonight. Okay, any questions so far?
No, not from me.
No, Davis. All good, mate?
No, I'm okay, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, how about, if you don't have any question, how about the assessment that we discussed last night? Have you got a chance to look at that? Or still digesting?
I must admit, I haven't done any further looking at the assessment since last night. And so I don't have any questions.
Fair enough. Okay, fair enough. Well, okay, if there's the case, then look, in the next session, we are going to discuss about the globalization, and following that, we are going to discuss the environmental scanning, which is part of the key components that helps us with the with our assessment one. Okay, so I would suggest that from now until next week, if you can also nominate the company and also the 2 markets, that will be fantastic. Okay, and all right, all of you from the hook, guys, have a good evening. Have a good night.
Thank you very much. You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your participation. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much.